Gulliver's Travels, first published by Jonathan Swift in 1726 under its original title, travels into several remote nations of the world in 4 parts by Lemuel Gulliver, first a surgeon and then a captain of several ships. He is known worldwide to young and old and is considered to be a classic of English literature. Often associated with children's literature, not many people know that Gulliver's Travels is much more than that. Political satire, human nature in general, philosophy, misogyny, misanthropy, grotesque. Those are just some of the remarks you may find that are attributed to Gulliver's Travels. Doesn't seem so childish anymore, does it? Let's find out today why Gulliver's Travels and its author were criticized at the time, what it has to do with politics at all, and why Swift was, and sometimes still is, criticized and accused of being a misanthrope. Prepare some tea and let's begin. It'll be better if we start, I think, with Swift himself. Let's have a quick look at his life and the period of time he lived in, which is essential to understanding Gulliver's Travels. Born on the 30th of November, 1667 in Dublin, Swift was the second child of Jonathan Swift and Abigail Eric, both of whom were English that escaped to Ireland for different reasons. Swift loses his parents at a young age, his father even before his birth and his mother after it, who leaves for England, leaving her child under the care of Godwin Swift, his uncle. Godwin takes full responsibility for Jonathan and finances his education, sending him to Kilkenny College and then to Trinity College Dublin, that Swift finishes in 1686 with Bachelor of Arts. After 2 years in 1688, while studying for his master's degree, Swift has to leave for England due to the troublesome political atmosphere brought by the Glorious Revolution, about which we'll talk just a little later. His mother helps him to find a good position. Swift begins working as assistant for Sir William Temple, an English diplomat and politician for whom Swift had been working for several years, although sometimes desired a better position for himself. Starting from 1700, Swift lives in Trim, a town in County Meath, Ireland. In 1702, he receives his Doctor of Divinity degree from Trinity College, Dublin. From this period, Swift starts to gain popularity and reputation as a writer. He publishes many of his works while visiting England, A Tale of a Tub and The Battle of the Books, both published in 1704. In around 1714 in London, Swift and other 5 writers, among whom was Alexander Pope, Swift's friend, founded the Scriblerus Club, a circle of authors for informal meetings to practice writing together. From these meetings, the persona of Martinus Scriblerus was born, under the name of which the group was writing their satirical literary works, memoirs of Martinus Scriblerus, for example. Besides, the Scriblerus Club was the place where the idea for Gulliver's Travels came up. While going out to the public eye, so to speak, Swift begins to show a great interest in politics. However, his political opinions and interactions are often viewed as his intentions and pursuits to get a good position in the church in England, for what he is, by the way, still sometimes criticized. In 1713, Swift became Dean of St. Patrick's Cathedral in Dublin, the position that he remained on until his final year, 1745. Here we have to mention, of course, the two rivalry political parties of that time, the Tories and the Whigs, at which we'll have a closer look just in a moment too. These parties played an important, if not crucial, role in the years following the Glorious Revolution. Once considered a Whig, a supporter of a democratic monarchy with a parliamentary system, Swift later turned into a Tory, a conservative party supporting a strong monarchy. Tories appeared to show their favor to him, which could lead Swift to obtain a prominent position in the church. However, Queen Anne is said to have displeased Swift. Moreover, the Tory government fell soon, so the writer in the end was allocated a position, as it's been already mentioned, of Dean at St. Patrick's Cathedral. The decision that allegedly left Swift greatly dissatisfied, since he had hoped for a more desirable and higher post. All his political experiences he would place into his masterpiece, Gulliver's Travels, which he would publish in 1726 under the pseudonym Lemuel Gulliver, that would gain a lot of popularity and reach success immediately, and the following year would be translated into different languages. The 16th of November 1726, Swift's friend and a fellow Scriblerus Club member, John Gave, wrote to him, "About 10 days ago, a book was published here on the travels of one Gulliver, which has been the conversation of the whole town ever since. The whole impression sold in a week, and nothing is more diverting than to hear the different opinions of people give of it. From the highest to the lowest, it is universally read, from the cabinet council to the nursery." Unfortunately, soon Swift's health began to deteriorate. Many expressed their opinions on his appearing insanity at the end of the 30s. In 1744, his friend Alexander Pope, and then the 19th of October 1745, Swift, at nearly 78 years old, died. The farewell ceremony and the funeral itself took place as Swift himself had planned. He was buried at St. Patrick's Cathedral next to Esther Johnson, or Stella as Swift preferred to call her. The woman he is said to have loved, although there are still many rumors and debates around his love stories. What also needs to be mentioned is that the author bequeathed the bulk of his fortune with the foundation of a hospital for mentally ill. It opened in 1757 under the name of St. Patrick's Hospital for Imbeciles, and it remains to this day with the name of St. Patrick's University Hospital. Jonathan Swift, as if already being aware of and feeling his health deteriorating and mental problems arising, wrote his final will in May 1740, including a detailed information where his body should be later placed, and created his own epitaph for his tombstone in Latin. It is often translated into English as, "Here is laid the body of Jonathan Swift, Doctor of Divinity, Dean of this Cathedral Church, where fierce indignation can no longer rend his heart. Go, traveler, and imitate, if you can, this earnest and dedicated champion of liberty." Please pay attention to the line, where fierce indignation can no longer rend his heart. We can see here how Swift wished to show everyone, and it was important to him that everybody understood that indignation of all the injustices and unfairness tore his heart apart. Indignation was so painful and destructive for his mental and physical health that he saw salvation only in his death, so he would no longer be disturbed by that resentment. Let's dive a bit deeper into the British atmosphere of that time and see how people lived, to what extent Gulliver's Travels was an innovation, and what the political situation was like in the country during Swift's lifetime. And I'm going to ask you in advance, please don't skip this part even if it seems to you unnecessary or too long. Trust me, it'll let you understand much better the travels and feel some specific parts of the story, even if we'll have to get back as far as 1685, and actually even a bit earlier. Before we continue, let's take a minute break and let me remind you about the subscription levels that I have. If you're watching this video, then you'll probably like the bookworm level subscription that I have, with the members of which I share every month a mini magazine I make myself, in which I write about famous and not very famous writers. This month, for example, I made a Swift edition. You can get it too, by the way. If you'd like to discover world literature with me, then join us. Find the link in the description. So, 1685, the year of succession of King James II, whose reign was notable for a huge number of conflicts concerning religious questions between Protestants and Catholics. If you look at the British history as a whole, you'll notice that it looked like a never-ending religious war between them. Being first a Catholic country, this religion was then absolutely refused because of the notorious argument between Henry VIII and the Church of Rome, which rejected to give a permission to a divorce with his first wife Catherine of Aragon, who failed to give him a son, a future successor, so the king was planning to marry Anne Boleyn. Catholics endured long-lasting persecution for the following 3 centuries. In 1534, the Church of England, also known as the Anglican Church, declared its independence and adopted a Protestant theology, breaking all ties with the Roman Catholic Church. Subsequently, during the reign of Mary I, a loyal Catholic who desired revenge against those who identified themselves as Protestants, leading to a dark period marked by executions which earned her the notorious name Bloody Mary. The crown later passed to Elizabeth I, daughter of Anne Boleyn, who professed Protestantism. This religious turmoil persisted until the time of James II, who ascended to the throne as a Catholic monarch. As a devout Catholic, James II granted expanded religious freedom to Catholics and favored them in military appointments. This caused rage and indignation among many English citizens and significantly divided the monarchy and the British Parliament. He later dissolved the Parliament and attempted to establish a new one that would unquestioningly support his rule based on the doctrine of the divine right of a king and absolutism. The actions of James, including suspicions of his desire for absolute monarchy, led to the loss of parliamentary support. The opposing factions consisted primarily of Whigs, who sought to exclude James from the throne, and Tories, who were more inclined to support him. The culmination of these tensions was the Revolution of 1688, commonly known as the Glorious Revolution, which marked the end of James II's reign and the beginning of the joint Protestant monarchy of William III and Mary II. Later, the governors of the nation fell under the reign of Queen Anne, known for her inclination towards Tory politicians. However, this was followed by the accession of George I to the throne in 1714, who expressed a favorable disposition towards the Whig party. It was during his rule that Robert Walpole, the first British Prime Minister, emerged on the political landscape, so to speak. Swift, in Gulliver's Travels, extensively satirized Walpole, depicting him in a very mocking light. The period of history that Swift lived in was, as you can have already noticed, full of changes, confusions that, for the most part, didn't even make any sense. So the author bravely took it upon himself to show us all the follies of that time, the follies of English nature, the homeland of Gulliver. The Travels is loaded with hidden meanings and allegories with which Swift attempted to show some political personas, human characteristics, or else whole historic events. However, in most of the examples we'll say that Swift's irony and satire were not solely directed at specific individuals, but rather covered a broader critique of culture and society in general. Swift takes us, readers, on a journey through magical and sometimes real places, or even separate worlds, inhabited by small, big, ugly and beautiful creatures/humans. We can notice these drastic shifts through the whole novel. First, Gulliver finds himself in the island of Lilliput, inhabited by petty, selfish creatures taller than 6 inches, full of narrow-minded ideas. Lilliputians' height here, by the way, is emphasized not by chance. It shows the insignificance of these midgets and their own conceit. How can such tiny creatures think so much about themselves? Gulliver, who is a giant compared to them, is surprised by their brevity. But he does not suspect that very soon he will find himself in a completely opposite situation. When he lives in the land of giants with the name of Brobdingnag, they will have the same opinion about him as Gulliver had about the Lilliputians. The little creatures find a way to use their giant guest. They tell him to help them defeat their neighboring country, their enemies from Blefuscu, between whom the war broke out over a disagreement concerning how to properly crack an egg. The two countries of different religions are divided into big Indians and little Indians, each claiming their own right way to crack an egg, from a little or big end. All this conflict reflects on the already mentioned religious revolution, so to speak, started by Henry VIII. The egg here might represent Christianity in general, little Indians, Protestants, and big Indians, Catholics. All the disputes between them are seen as something completely absurd and absolutely unworthy of leading any wars whatsoever, with so many deaths over such a stupid conflict. A parody concerning the religious conflict is not the only one that we can find in Book 1. Lemuel Gulliver also mentions the so-called high hills and low hills on the island of Lilliput, which is a perfect satire on the two rival parties during the lifetime of Swift: the Whigs and the Tories. The high heels represent the Tories due to their loyalty to the High Church faction within the Church of England and their belief in the monarchy's absolute authority. Meanwhile, the low heels represent the Whigs, who inclined toward Low Church views, given little emphasis to ritual, and believed in parliamentary supremacy. The Emperor of Lilliput is shown as a supporter of the low heels, just like George I tended to employ only Whigs in his administration. The whole conflict between Lilliput and Blefuscu can be seen as the wars between England and France. There's another interesting fact mentioned by Gulliver about the inhabitants of Lilliput. They bury their dead with their heads directly downwards because they hold an opinion that in 11,000 moons they are all to rise again, in which period the earth, which they conceive to be flat, will turn upside down, and by this means they shall at their resurrection be found ready standing on their feet. The learned among them confess the absurdity of this doctrine, but the practice still continues in compliance to the vulgar. It may look like Swift is showing us how many of our beliefs cannot be justified or even explained. There is a great variety of human blind beliefs. Another notable part and character of the book is the so-called Houyhnhnm, Lord High Treasurer of Lilliput, who is highly skilled at dancing on a rope. Houyhnhnm becomes Gulliver's enemy and represents one of Swift's political rivals in real life, Robert Walpole, who became Britain's first Prime Minister. Walpole was a Whig, and Swift at that time already became a Tory. The activities of the Whig committee were very skillfully satirized by Gulliver in the Lilliputians' way of life. Gulliver then takes us to see the land of the giants, Brobdingnag, and if in Lilliput he felt his superiority, not only considering his physical features, but human components as well, then in Brobdingnag, the traveler, being the tiniest thing the inhabitants have ever seen, is treated like a pet put inside a cage and is made to understand by the king of that land that Gulliver's motherland seems to be a heap of conspiracies, rebellions, murders, massacres, revolutions, banishments, the very worst effects that avarice, faction, hypocrisy, cruelty, hatred, envy. He observed how contemptible a thing was human grandeur, which could be mimicked by such diminutive insects as I. Conversing with the traveler, the king of the country concludes that the bulk of Gulliver's natives to be the most pernicious race of little odious vermin that nature ever suffered to crawl upon the surface of the earth. The people of Brobdingnag are shown in every way morally and ethically superior to Europeans, so here we again can see what role plays the height. Now Gulliver is miserable and pathetic, and his receivers are superior, looking down on him and his way of thinking. In his third journey, Gulliver finds himself in Laputa and gives us the detailed depiction of its inhabitants. First, their strange physical appearance. Their heads are inclined either to the right or left, one eye turned inward and the other directed upward towards the sky. Their interests focused solely on mathematics, music, geometry, their knowledge is very limited within these sciences, which they can't even apply to something truly worthwhile. They anxiously worry about the imminent catastrophe that they strongly believe will befall the earth. In the same part of Gulliver's Travels, Book 3, Swift visits the Academy of Projectors of Lagado, which satirizes the Royal Society or the Royal Society of London for Improving Natural Knowledge, that still exists, by the way, in the UK and is considered to be the oldest academy of science in the world. The inhabitants of the land named Balnibarri, Lagado being its metropolis, work in their academy, as it seems, in vain, trying to develop their country's educational and research level. They are doing absolutely bizarre experiments that contribute nothing to the development of intelligence and education of its population. There is also a very notable and interesting object in the academy, the so-called engine, which is claimed to be one of the first references to a modern computer. The students of the Academy of Lagado showed Gulliver the engine in its working condition, and one professor explained, "Everyone knew how laborious the usual method is of attaining the arts and sciences, whereas by his contrivance the most ignorant person, at a reasonable charge and with a little bodily labor, might write books in philosophy, poetry, politics, laws, mathematics, and theology, without the least assistance from genius or study." Don't you think that it's terribly reminiscent of today's AI development that can write not only coherent text, but whole novels and even poetry? And we cannot live without mention the island of Glubdubdrib from this part too, which is inhabited by magicians that let Gulliver use their power and call from the dead anyone he wishes. The traveler decides to meet Alexander the Great, Hannibal, Julius Caesar, Brutus, Homer, Aristotle, and many other famous personas of historic and scientific worlds that reveal to him many secrets, after which Gulliver says that many historical facts he had been taught were total lies. He then wishes to see some of the modern dead who had made the greatest figure for 200 or 300 years past in our own and other countries of Europe, as he says, and then adds that his disappointment was grievous and unexpected, and that he was chiefly disgusted with modern history. As we progress through Gulliver's Travels, it is impossible to leave unnoticed the changing of the mood and atmosphere, the impact that the book gives you. It's getting worse and worse, in a sense that Gulliver gets more and more disappointed in the human nature, humankind, which he, of course, transmits to readers. In his last journey, in Book 4, which is claimed to show the highest level of Swift's misanthropy, Swift cruelly depicts human behavior and irrationality. Gulliver finds himself in the land of Houyhnhnm, horse-like creatures whose level of intellectuality cannot even compare with ours. They live on the same island as the so-called Yahoos, physically and mentally dirty, so to speak. They are depicted as morally inferior beings, and it is them who human beings, us, are associated with. There is an interesting depiction of war given by Gulliver to his master Houyhnhnm. He explains to him that sometimes a war is entered upon because the enemy is too strong, and sometimes because he is too weak. Sometimes our neighbors want the things which we have, or have the things we want, and both fight until they take ours or give us theirs. It is a very justifiable cause of war to invade a country after the people have been wasted by famine, destroyed by pestilence, or embroiled by factions amongst themselves. It is justifiable to enter into a war against our nearest ally when one of his towns lies convenient for us, or a territory of land that would render our dominions round and compact. There is also an interesting comment that Gulliver gives on alcohol. He says, "Wine was not imported among us from foreign countries to supply the want of water or other drinks, but because it was a sort of liquid which made us merry by putting us out of our senses, diverted all melancholy thoughts, beget wild, extravagant imaginations in the brain, raised our hopes, and banished our fears, suspended every office of reason for a time, and deprived us for the use of our limbs until we fell into a profound sleep, although it must be confessed that we always awaked sick and dispirited, and that the use of this liquor filled us with diseases which made our lives uncomfortable and short." And probably the last extract I would like to read is the one that Gulliver gives on our irrationalities, saying, "We eat when we were not hungry, and drank without the provocation of thirst, that we sat whole nights drinking strong liquors without eating a bit, which disposed us to sloth, inflamed our bodies, and precipitated or prevented digestion." At the end, Gulliver, understanding the ill nature of humanity, refuses to come back to his native land, calling it the country inhabited by ugly yahoos, including his own family. Nevertheless, he eventually does get back home and tries to find a peaceful life among yahoos, not without difficulties though. In the course of this entire discussion, recollections of some facts from British history, we can now say without doubt that this satirical creation represents unprecedented literary power. Swift was able to combine every aspect of human life, human nature in general, politics, science, in one satire. Gulliver was able to enter into every aspect of English life of his time, satirizing the follies, foibles, and vices of his fellow English countrymen. Now we can say for sure that Swift did a great job satirizing the whole world. Reading chapter after chapter, you are recognizing something or somebody in it. This is a bitter truth that we have to admit. And thinking about it, one can even doubt the accusations of Swift's misanthropy. After all, Swift didn't create the Gulliver's Travels to make everybody hate him or show that he hates everyone. It wasn't for laughing or being unkind, but the main idea was more likely to show us the main problems we have, the things we must discuss, the issues we must know and be cautious about. Let's also remember the letter that Swift wrote to Alexander Pope while creating the Travels, in which he said that his main idea was to vex the world rather than divert it. Please don't rush to accuse Swift, though. Look at it from another side. Such satires, even though they might be harsh, cruel, and exaggerated sometimes, have their every right to exist, because they make us, at least some of us, think. You would have probably already guessed my personal opinion on Swift and his famous satire. I personally don't see any harsh misanthropy that some critics saw while reading the Gulliver's Travels. Did they, the Whigs, for example, express their not less cruel criticism towards Swift and the Travels just because they saw themselves in it and didn't like it? Too bad we cannot ask them, but I guess the answer is quite predictable. Thank you so much for coming till the end. Hope you enjoyed it. If it's so, please give this video your like so that more people will be able to discover it. As always, see you in the next one.